Okay, welcome everyone to CAEL 301 Speaking. So this is a workshop style seminar for just focusing on the speaking components of the CAEL test. So it's a 2-hour session today, so hopefully you have some coffee handy. We might take a short break at the first end of the first hour, depending on where the time is. But feel free, of course, to take a break whenever you feel like it. I do want to go over a few things today. As I mentioned to those who were attending early, the microphones are muted, and if you've been to another session, you'll know that. Unfortunately, we're not able to activate them because it creates a lot of internet lag and a little bit of chaos as well. So unfortunately, we can't talk directly to each other for today's session, but we can use the questions box. And already a lot of people have been doing that, which is great. I've gotten to know that we have people from Calgary, logging in from Calgary, Toronto. Um, also Abdullah as well is logging in from Toronto, and also Manjit. So we have quite a few from Toronto here as well. Great. And what they're doing is using the questions box, and that's something we use to communicate with each other throughout the session today. So the questions box is located on the GoToWebinar control panel. If you don't see that, it may have minimized on you and you need to open it up again with by clicking on the orange arrow. Throughout the session, it may minimize on you when you don't use it. Just click the orange arrow, open it up, and the question box is down below. Anything you type in there, we can see. Myself, as well as Megan, who is also a presenter here for many sessions, and you may have been to one of hers. She's here to help out, answer some questions today. So you may get a response from her in the questions box. That's really helpful to me as well, because then I can focus on presenting. So it's great when she's on board. So if you do have a question, she'll do her best to answer it, and potentially I could answer it as well. If I see that the question might benefit others in the session, I will try to address it. All right, and I also sometimes ask questions myself of you, and if you want to make any comments based on my questions, it's great for you to type those in the questions box as well, and I'll be able to see what you're typing. Hello, Manpreet, how are you? I remember your name. Good, and welcome. All right, also, if you do have any technical issues, we always recommend to log out and log back in, because that usually corrects it. It's usually a problem on your end. Sometimes, occasionally, it's a problem on our end, and we'll know that when a number of people let us know in the questions box they're having a problem. But it's usually on your end, and we recommend logging out and logging back in to see if that corrects the issue. If not, you want to try Chrome as your browser if you're not using that, because it seems to be less of a problem, okay? Miriam's asking how long? It's roughly 2 hours this session. So just to remind everyone, this is a 2-hour session, okay? And we do recommend you have a paper and pen handy for taking notes. And also, if you can, a recording device of some kind. This can be your cell phone. We're going to do a little bit of practice today, not too much, but we're going to do a little bit of practice with an actual test question from the past. And it's recommended that you actually speak out loud your response and then record it. So if you do have a recording device, great. You can also record on your computer as well. And after the session, you will get an email with links to a survey, and it's a short survey. It takes 3 to 5 minutes, and it's just great to get some feedback on our sessions and to maybe find out a little bit about you. Also, if you want to make a comment about the session, whether it's positive or a suggestion, that's really helpful to us as well. But in that email, you also get some links to some study materials. So you want to make sure you take advantage of that. It'll have some of the information that we're presenting today, including the checklists and the study skills and strategies that we discussed today. Okay. All right, this is me. My name's John Haggerty. We don't use the webcam throughout the session. I don't think it's too helpful, but it's kind of nice to at least see who's talking, right? As you can see, I lost my hair. I don't know where it's gone, but if anyone finds it, let me know. I'm an online instructor and content developer here at Paragon. And Paragon Testing Enterprises is the administrator of the CAEL test, okay? I have about 20 years of experience, ESL and EFL. Spent about 10 years in South Korea. So in that time, I did participate in a lot of test preparation. And so I do understand some of the challenges that you're going through in test preparation. And I'll do my best to help prepare you for your speaking component of the test today. All right, so just a quick agenda. We're going to do a quick test overview, not spend too much time on that, and then really focus in on the speaking tasks because that's our focus for today. So we'll talk about independent speaking, and there are 3 questions that are classified as independent, type A and type B. Almost sounds like diabetes or something, but there are 2 types of questions. And we'll talk about those. And the third one's a little bit different because you speak on a visual, which is usually a graph of some kind with information on it that you need to explain, and we'll talk about that one. Then we'll move on to integrated speaking, and this happens in the integrated sections of the test, which I'll show you in a moment. And you'll have to speak on the long reading and speak on the long listening in those integrated parts. Finally, we'll end up with CAEL study materials, which I'm sure you'll be interested in learning about a little bit more to see what we have that might be of benefit to you in the time that you have before your test. Obviously, if your test is coming up very quickly, you won't have a lot of time to look into these, but some of them might be helpful. But if you have a test in the next month or 2 months or 3 months, or you're thinking long term, you definitely want to look into these study materials. Okay, a little bit about the CAEL test. As I mentioned, it's administered by Paragon Testing Enterprises, and this is a subsidiary of the University of British Columbia. Okay, and the test was originally, I think back in the 80s, was a paper-based test, but now it is a completely computer-based test. So the CAEL acronym stands for Canadian Academic English Language Test. Sometimes you will see a CE attached to it, and that means it's the computer edition. But now we are retiring the paper-based version, and we will be focusing exclusively on the computer-based test. So you probably won't see that in the future. It is 100% Canadian designed and computer delivered. Okay, so unlike other tests that might have a speaking component that you need to do in person, maybe with an interviewer, the CAEL is done more like the TOEFL test, where you will do all components on the computer, including the speaking component. Okay, and it's an integrated skills and topic-based test. I'll explain that when I show you the format, the overall format. It's used primarily for entry to Canadian universities, and I think virtually every university is accepting the CAEL at this point. Certainly all the major universities accept the CAEL. So if you are going to a Canadian university, you can be very confident that the CAEL will be accepted. It's also used for several professional associations like the ICCRC, which is the Immigration, it's an Immigration Council of Canada Regulatory, something like that. And it's a immigration requirement for immigration consultants. So you may be doing it for that reason as well. And Mohammed's noted that the CAEL originated actually at Carleton University, right? Excellent. And actually was originally designed by my master's advisor, who was Jana Fox at Carleton University, right? Good. And now it's been purchased by Paragon, and now it's been switched over to a computer-based test. And I think it's been improved in many, many ways. So it's also great to have it on the computer as well. It's designed to provide a realistic assessment of academic language proficiency, and this is at the first year undergraduate level. So when you're looking for, how to prepare, maybe readings or lectures you want to listen to, you want to make sure you're not listening to something or reading something that is too difficult, maybe at a graduate level. No, it's a first-year undergraduate level. So that means introductory textbooks, introductory lectures as well. Oh, Minas has let me know what ICCRC stands for. Thank you. Immigration Consultants of Canada Regulatory Council. That's a mouthful, right? But yeah, that's the ICCRC. Good. And let's see. All right, so let's talk about the test centers and what you can expect in a test center. If you haven't been in one, you know, it's can be a little bit of an experience at first because everybody's doing their test together. So you do have some privacy. This is the test center here at in Vancouver at Paragon, and it's a very well designed one. You have pretty good privacy here with the dividers, and the equipment is very good as well. The headphones are top notch. They do cancel noise, but not as much as $300, $500 headphones, but they certainly do cancel the noise somewhat. But you will hear noise around you, and that's one of the challenges of being in the test center and doing a speaking test on a computer. And it's important to try to get some practice doing this, to get used to it, and be able to filter out all the noise around you and focus on what you need to do. That's really important to get used to that. And you could just play noise around you while you're trying to do your speaking to help you get used to that. But you could also do a pre-test, and we'll talk about that later in the session. If you wanted to do a pre-test and look into that, I'll explain a little bit about how you can go about that. All right, let's look at the overall test. I just wanted to show you what everything looks like. So there are 5 parts to the test. You do start with an independent speaking section, part 1, and this gives you 3 speaking questions. Takes about 7 to 10 minutes to do that. And then you'll move on to integrated components, and there's 4 integrated parts 2 to 5. They're integrated because you need to read, but also do something else, like speak. You might have to listen, then speak, as in part 3. And part 4, you'll have to do reading, listening, and writing. So they're integrating the skills in various ways here, all right? And that's what makes it an integrated test. And this is designed to make it a little bit more realistic to what you need to do in university. So one of the benefits of doing the CAEL is that your assessment is kind of giving you a good idea of how well you can do in a Canadian university as well. And that's a good, I think, added benefit to doing the CAEL. The TOEFL is also integrated in various ways, but other tests are not as integrated as the CAEL, for example. All right, but we're just going to be focusing on speaking here. So notice that there are additional speaking questions. So we do have the first 3 in part 1, and then we have additional ones. But I'll explain that in a moment. But I did want to mention also that it's a topic-based test. And it has to be because each integrated component, you need to read. For example, let's look at part 2. You need to read a short passage and then a long passage, and then you're answering questions about those passages. And then afterwards, you'll need to speak about it, and you speak about the same topic. So the short reading passage, the long reading passage, and the speaking question are all about the same topic. So that's what makes it topic-based. So you are going to get 4 different topics on the test. All right. And I should also mention, if you're interested in webinars, sometimes it's confusing. Our online course of webinars, we have a series of 4 webinars. And I just wanted to mention that the reason we have them separated into 4 is because we cover different parts of the test in each seminar, in each session. So you want to attend, maybe all of them to get a full, in-depth discussion of the test, or maybe you want to attend one of them because it's something you want to focus on. CAEL 204 is, I think, an important one because parts 4 and 5 really are challenging, because especially part 4 is fully integrated with a long reading, long listening, and a long writing. So you may want to attend that one if you're not confident in doing well on those parts of the test. Now, I mentioned it's a topic-based test. That means you will get 4 topics, but those topics can come from arts or sciences. And so it's important to try to get a sense of what it's like to read or listen to subjects in the different areas, right, in arts and science. That doesn't mean you need to become an expert in both, not at all. In fact, you don't need to be an expert in anything to do very well on the test, other than your ability to use language, to show your ability to use academic language, is really what the test is assessing. But in terms of content, you will get passages from both arts and science. So you want to get familiar with it a little bit and make sure that you're reading across a diverse range of subjects, not just focusing on your preferred topic or just on one test preparation book that maybe only has arts-based material in it. On the CAEL, you may get science-based material as well. Also, you probably already know that we have 9 bands that run from 10 to 90 for the CAEL, and you're probably, looking for a 70, as most are, but not everyone. Some people, require a 60. They need a 60 for entry to a university in some cases, depends on the department. And also sometimes it's a little bit higher as well. It could be an 80. I haven't seen any 90s required, but certainly I have seen 80 occasionally. So it's best to know what your requirement is, right? So make sure you look into that so you know what you need to achieve. All right, and let's focus in now on the speaking tasks on the test. There are 5 in total, and here they are. As I mentioned, part 1 has 3 speaking tasks. Okay, so you get a lot of the speaking right out of the way to begin. I think that's good in some ways. Can be a little bit stressful for those who are not as comfortable speaking, but it does start with at least questions that are a little easier in a sense, because they rely more on your background knowledge and your ability to maybe be a little bit creative and also to express your opinion. So these questions I think are a little easier than the later ones. So in parts 2 and 3, you'll get additional speaking questions. But by the end of part 3, you'll be finished with speaking and you'll be moving on to other tasks that require you to write at the end. All right, so you notice here from parts 2 to 5, we're basically moving from receptive skills like reading and listening, and then moving towards productive skills like speaking and writing. And that's what you want to do. You want to, simulate that in your practice as well in various ways. Whenever you read something, you want to be actively reading or actively listening to be ready to speak or write about these things. That's what we need to do in university, which is what the test is designed to get a measurement of. All right. So as I mentioned, there are independent speaking tasks, but they're only in part 1. You speak about yourself, and on the third question, a visual, use your own knowledge. You have about 30 to 60 seconds of prep time and 1 to 2 minutes of speaking time. Okay, and integrated speaking, again, that starts in part 2 and continues in part 3. You speak about a reading passage or a lecture. You use those sources in your response, but it's not just, intended to be a summary of that. You have to actively use sources for another purpose, which is going to be explained in the question. Okay, and you do have about 2 minutes speaking time for that. Okay, so let's move forward. I want to show you the instruction screen for part 1. This is helpful just to give you some context and also to let you know exactly how many seconds of preparation time you have and how much time you'll need to speak. This kind of gets you set to get you ready for answering the question. And when you're ready, you would click this next button. If you don't click it, eventually you will be moved forward. But if you're ready, you can click next. Just know that when you click the next button at any point in the test, you cannot go back, okay? You can only go forward. So just be aware of that when you click next, you know you're ready. In this case, when you click next, you'll automatically move forward to your preparation time. So you have to be ready for that preparation time. And here you can see your question. You'll be very focused on that for sure. What do you want to study at university and why? In this case, it's an independent speaking type A question. So it's really just meant to draw on your background knowledge, maybe your background experiences and your ability to speak about that, or maybe your hopes or wishes, things like this. It'll be more personal, okay? But you do get 30 seconds of preparation time, which will count down as soon as you see the question. You should also take quick note of the instructions, right? So give details and examples to support your response, and of course how you'll be evaluated, the content and the accuracy of your language. But always briefly look at the instructions just so you know. And then of course you might be interested in knowing how much speaking time. Maybe you forgot or you didn't read the instruction screen. So this is provided as well, so you know how much time you need to speak. Your preparation time will start to count down from 30 in this case to 0. And when it counts down to 0, you'll automatically move forward to your speaking, your recording time. And so you need to be ready for that as well. But that preparation time is really important. You want to try to use the time wisely. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today as well. Also, this is a checklist that you'll have access to. You can also, if you like, you can take a picture of this. There is a camera icon on your GoToWebinar screen. At the top, it enables you to take a screenshot of any slide that you want. So if you wanted to take a screenshot now, feel free to do so. But this checklist is really helpful because it provides the best indication of what the raters are looking for. These categories are the same categories that raters consider when they're rating your response. And so it's kind of important to think about these components. We're always wondering what constitutes a great response, or what is a band 70 response? It's very hard to make that very clear because there are so many factors that go into rating, and these are some of the factors here. And we recommend you use this checklist to rate your own responses, but also when you're listening to sample responses, maybe rating maybe your friends' responses, providing feedback. So let's just go over the 4 components here. We have delivery skills. This includes things like how you speak. Are you speaking at a good volume? Is it too loud or too soft? Are you pausing a lot? Are you hesitating a lot? We always pause and hesitate in speaking. It's going to happen. But the more we do it, the more it affects our response. We can't get as much content, for example, in. So, and also it's harder to listen to. And obviously speed of speech. What is too fast? What is too slow? This is a bit subjective, but you have to speak at your natural speed. If you go too fast and you have some pronunciation challenges as well, it can be hard for the listener. So you want to go at a speed that's appropriate for you, and also that allows you to get enough content into your response as well. And of course, rhythm, pronunciation, and intonation is part of delivery skills. Pronunciation does not mean accent. Everyone has an accent, and that's not part of the assessment at all. But pronunciation is. You have to be understood. And so, you have to work on certain aspects of pronunciation to make sure that other people around the world are able to understand you. So an intonation is the up and down of your voice. If you use a question, you maybe go up, right? If it's a statement, you go down. But also we emphasize certain words and sentences. All of this is related to intonation. And you want to try to use some of that because it helps to make it more natural, but also it gives more information to the listener, maybe about feelings or what's important in what we're talking about. So try to work on that as well. Accuracy of language, of course. This includes all kinds of things related to grammar, vocabulary, and of course we want to keep working on this. It's an academic language test, which means the language should be academic. as much as possible. Not in every question. For example, the first speaking question does not have to be as academic as others, but certainly we want to have some level of formality in our responses, and our ability to use more impressive language will help us. It should be suitable and precise. You should speak in complete sentences as much as you can, and try to vary the types of sentences that you're using, simple, compound, complex, to try to get some variety of sentence structures there. Okay, and of course, transitions, we're going to talk about that today, are really important. Transitions can be, linking words or phrases that we use to help the listener understand the logic of our response, right? The order, the coherence. So these are really important things to be working on as well, transitions. The content of the response, really important as well. So obviously what you say, your ideas, are they clear? Do you follow up your ideas? Do you have examples? Are you developing them? Or are you just listing a bunch of ideas? It's better to develop your ideas. Of course, you want to stay on topic as much as possible. And of course, the tone is important because you need to match the situation, and that's where the context is important as well. So if you're talking to your professor, you would have a different tone than maybe you're talking to your friend, right? And also the topic matters. What are you talking about? Would influence the tone that you're using. All right, and of course you don't want to repeat ideas, and hopefully you can conclude with a closing remark, which is always helpful. But not, some people think, what if I don't do a closing remark? What's going to happen? It's not going to ruin your response, so don't worry too much. But you want to try to get that in, and that involves timing the response and being able to leave enough time for a good closing, but also to know what to say in the closing as well. Task fulfillment has more to do with understanding the question and speaking for the entire time as well. So if you have a 2-minute response, did you speak for most of that time, or did you get stuck halfway through and stop speaking? So that's about task fulfillment. Okay, and there are other sections of the checklist, but these apply for different tasks. All right, for part 1, task 3, speaking on a visual, there are some additional points here that raters consider. And then of course for the integrated speaking, it has a lot to do with source use. How do you integrate the sources? I'm not going to go over these, but they are available to you, and we'll be using them a little bit later as we look at the different tasks here. Okay, so let's get started and look at some actual questions and start discussing strategies and how we might approach these tasks. So again, in independent speaking, part 1, you have 3 questions, type A, type B, and speaking on a visual. Okay, so let's look at this question again. What do you want to study at university and why? So some of you might, be able to answer this very easily. Maybe you're currently thinking about that, and so you're prepared. But others, maybe this is not something you're thinking about. Maybe you're preparing for ICCRC, and this is not a question that's relevant for you. Regardless, you need to try to answer it, and you can do that in a number of ways. If it's a real idea, this is the truth, great, go with it, and then you can speak about it naturally. However, you may have to be creative, imaginative, and come up with something. Or maybe you want to talk about something that you did in the past. Maybe you went to university, and you want to talk about why you chose the subject. And that's okay to slightly alter the question, but don't change it too much, and try to focus on what the question is asking, and make sure you understand what that question is asking as well. And of course, pay attention to your preparation time and speaking time always. I think it's important to know the speaking time as you're preparing. It will affect your note taking as well. Okay. And of course, look over here at the instructions on the left side. Of course, you need details and examples. So this could be a reminder that you need to develop your ideas, right? And of course, content and accuracy of your language. So what should you do with your 30 seconds of preparation time? It's not a lot of time to prepare, but it's certainly important to think about what you can do in that time. Okay, I want you to think about that for a moment. I'm going to look at some of these questions that have popped up. Thank you, Megan, for responding to many of them, which allows me to get through the session a little bit easier. But it's always good for me to engage with some of these questions. So Aurora's asked for a closing remark. Should be from our own opinion, or it depends on the subject. And yes, it really does depend on the question itself. It could be your opinion, but of course that would depend on whether the question's asking for your opinion. In this case, what do you want to study at university and why? Really depends on where your answer goes, but your closing remark would be something related to what you're saying, but not just repeating what you're saying. So it would be a way of signaling to the listener that you're closing your response and add something of interest to the end of it. So maybe in this example, if I was talking about that, I might say, well, I hope I do really well at university. This subject is really important to me, and I hope I get a great job afterwards. Maybe something like that. It's just a closing remark to kind of sum up. You don't want to stop mid-sentence or on an idea that's not developed and this kind of thing, right? Okay, I'm going to move forward. Let's see. Does anyone want to make a comment on what they would do in their 30 seconds of preparation time for this? Would you just think in your head, or would you do something different? If you were to take notes, how would you take your notes? What would you do in these 30 seconds? Thank you, Leah has said, write an outline on what I want to say. Good. So how would you write that outline? Would you make a table? Would you make, like maybe a mind map of some kind? How would you approach it? I'm curious how you might write the outline. Yeah, Palak says make points, like bullet points. Good. Kudzia, I love that name. Kudzia, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Jot down ideas. Right, excellent. That's a good way of expressing it, jot down, which means quickly write. You don't have a lot of time, right? So you need to jot down very quickly what you might say, and this just might be 3 bullet points, right? Good. And Leah, don't worry about capitals, no problem. I know you're not screaming at me. Minas has said the name of the program. Good. Very important to say that, right? And to start with that. And 2 to 3 reasons why you're choosing, right? And Madab says jot down words like IT, accounting, etc. Manjit writes some points. Kudzia says maybe some linkers. So maybe you mean linking phrases or linking words or transitions, maybe something like that. That might be helpful. You don't have a lot of time to think about it, but maybe. Ambreen has said stick to 2 key ideas and expand it. Yes. I think 2 ideas is enough for a 60-second response, 2 main ideas, and that gives you some time to develop each one. So I think that's a good approach as well. Kudzia says have an intro as well. I think that's good. It's hard to do in 30 seconds to have your intro fully prepared, but certainly thinking about how you're going to start, I think would be really important. And Aurora said keywords, right. And that's really all you have time for is keywords. Some people just use abbreviations, some people use, pictures, draw little tiny pictures maybe, something like that. Okay, good. Thanks so much for your engagement. I appreciate that. So what should you do in your 30 seconds? Here's just a couple of examples. Be sure you know exactly what you need to do, and that's really focusing in on the question. And here you note there are 2 things you need to talk about. What do you want to study and why? That's pretty easy in this question to recognize that, but some questions are a little bit more complex and they may have actually 3 parts to them. And if you don't read the question carefully, you might miss a part. I find it's very useful to spend a few seconds doing this. Maybe it will influence how you take notes as well. Like Ambreen says, in a table format, list the ideas and maybe a word. Right. And maybe knowing the parts of the question, maybe if there's 3 parts, you might use a table as well to make sure you don't miss any of those parts. So this can be a very helpful technique as well. Good. And make basic notes. So as many have mentioned, jot down things. This might be enough to get me through the question. And I think I could write this in the 30 seconds. It would make sense to me, but maybe not to someone else, right? But it certainly helps to write something down in this way. These are just bullet points. You might use a table, you might use a mind map. I actually like a mind map, which is just drawing different circles, because then I can isolate, I can just write down as I think, and then maybe I can put a number 1, 2, 3, or 1 and 2. This is the order that I'll go. I think it's helpful. I might even cross out an idea because I don't like it anymore. But again, 30 seconds is not a lot of time to prepare, but we have to maximize that time as much as we can. All right, so let's listen to a sample response. Okay, I'm hoping that my speaker is loud enough. I think it is. So we're going to listen to a test taker respond to this question. What do you want to study at university and why? I'm going to show you the transcript and we'll play the sample. Remember, a rater does not see this transcript. We only wrote the transcript to help you follow along with the response, okay? But raters don't see what you're saying. They just listen, and they listen, 2 or 3 times, as many times as they need to listen. But for us, we're going to look at the transcript. If you rather just listen and not read, you can do that as well. But for those who maybe want to follow along, you can read and listen at the same time. Okay, here we go. And if you want to take a guess at the level of this, you can feel free to do that as well, and any comments you might have as you're listening. Okay, let's listen.
I'm a 5th-year student in UBC, majoring in psychology and minoring in classical, Near Eastern, and religious studies. And so I guess in that way, I've already decided what I want to study in university. The reason that I wanted to major in psychology is because I've always been interested in the way that human behavior is shaped by the human mind. Everyone has different motivations and different personalities, and that affects how our actions come. So I was very interested in learning about that, particularly also in language acquisition, the psychology behind language, and how there's a certain point in our lives where we are able to pick up language more easily, and also just how the environment and our genes and all sorts of different factors affect our lives in ways that we don't even realize. And I also minored in classical study.
Okay, so hopefully you're able to hear that well. If you're having any difficulty hearing that clearly, let me know. I can increase the volume a little bit. But what do you think of the response? Maybe you want to take a guess at what band level the test taker is at, or any comment on some of the language or any of the information. Remember, this is the checklist that we're talking about. This is what the raters use, right? They're talking about delivery skills, how do they speak, their language use, the content, what they're saying, their ideas, and how well they understood the question. So let's see, we have some guesses here. Palak thinks maybe 70. Ayman thinks 70 as well. And Leia thinks maybe 80. And Abdullah 80. Good. Miriam also 80. Oh, thank you, Minaz, for telling me the volume's good. I appreciate that. Madab, Issy, and Manpreet think 70. And Leia says she used appropriate language and good intonation. I also noticed the intonation in that response as well. I think that was very helpful. Her pronunciation is definitely very clear. That's important to be able to follow along. And we have some other guesses here, 70, 60, 70. So everyone's roughly right. This person achieved a band 70. Now, this doesn't mean that this response was a 70. In my opinion, it's higher. It might be an 80. I'm not a rater, but I'm just guessing that this is better. And the reason why this is possible is because we don't know what the actual band level for each individual response is, because it's a very complicated process of rating. But what we do know is that what the test taker was able to achieve with all 5 questions, all 5 speaking questions. And remember, I said they do get a little bit more difficult later. So people tend to do very well on the first one and the second one. Some people struggle with the third one, and more people struggle with, the integrated component. So I have a feeling this one's quite good and helped her in, a lot in terms of getting a band 70. So you want to start well, right? You want to really show your language ability right from the beginning in speaking for the first 2 questions here. Good. And Madhav says she is fairly fluent. I agree. She's fluent. She struggled a little bit only in terms of ideas, right? And that's going to happen in speaking. It's definitely going to happen. Also, there was one other challenge here, is that she was cut off at the end and wasn't able to really have a closing remark or develop that idea much. So that's something you want to pay attention to. It's not a big deal, but it's certainly something you should be working on as well. Good. Abdullah says she spoke about her major really well, and it was quite detailed. I agree. And it's a good intro as well. Good. All right, so I wanted to show just some of the language aspects that are impressive, probably why this person was able to achieve a band 70. Probably do even better on this question than other ones. But here are some of the transitions, and actually they're not that impressive, the transitions. So here is an opportunity to improve. Most commonly in speaking, the transitions that we always see are and, so, and but. It's very common, and that's just normal in speaking. But remember, this is an academic language test, and your ability to improve your academic language is what's being, assessed to some extent. So transitions are really important. And if you're able to work on those and make them a little bit more impressive, I think it's an easy way to improve your language use here. So definitely work on transitions. These are fine, but there's definitely room for improvement in terms of transition use here. So work on that. Of course, you want to be natural. You don't want to be throwing in a bunch of transitions just to use them when they don't flow well or they don't fit well into the overall, style of your speaking. So you want to be natural with them, but keep working on it. In terms of language, this was really one of the strengths. She's talking about a majoring and minoring and using the language appropriately. Behavior is shaped by, nice, different motivations, language acquisition, the psychology behind language. That's a nice expression, showing that maybe she already understands her field a little bit as well, which is great. Pickup language is a little bit informal, but it works here. It's not too bad. So, but you want to be a little careful with phrasal verbs. Or idioms, they can be a little informal. And different factors affect our lives. She's using language here really well, and this was noticed by others in their comments as well. Good. And finally, just the ideas in terms of content. She does have 3 main ideas, but she's not really able to develop the second and third one as much, especially the third one. So as was mentioned earlier, maybe 2 main ideas fully developed might be a good approach for a 60-second response. But here she has 3 ideas. Behavior is shaped by the human mind, so that's one reason. Language acquisition as well, she's interested in. And also how the environment or genes affects our lives. So this helps to explain why she's interested in psychology, which is good. Kudzia has a comment here. I just will make a quick comment on it. Kudzia is offering an introduction. These days, university degrees are becoming more important for hunting good jobs. And she's wondering if this is a good introduction for this I would say it's a little bit too formal because remember, this is a more of a personal response and you're speaking about your background, your experience or your opinion or your preferences. And so this might be more suitable for more of an opinion that's based on maybe the second question that we're going to look at in a moment. That might be a good introduction if this was the second question, because it requires you to give an opinion about something and you want to be a little bit more objective. So maybe that intro would be better suited. But here it's best to probably just get right to it, answer the question directly, and say what is the major that you're interested in or what you do want to study in university. And you can talk about all kinds of things about the reasons why. It can focus on the subject itself and why you're interested in that, but you might talk about what you want to do after university, right? What do you want to do with the degree? What kind of job do you want to get? And why are you interested in that? It's an extension, right? So anyway, it's good to be, practicing looking at different sample responses and trying to think about how you would respond, right? So for the first one, quickly decide what you'll talk about. Think of at least 2 supporting ideas. Again, if you have 3, it can be difficult to develop them. It really depends on the rate of speech, on your rate of speech, how fast you speak, or how quickly you come up with some supporting ideas as well. Provide details and examples, develop those ideas. You want to start with a clear and informative statement. Okay, so you want to address the question being asked as soon as possible because that maximizes the content. Okay, you want to get right to your reasons and develop them because this is what will maximize your score. Okay, and personalize your response as you talk, especially for question 1 here. It's more personal and you want to make sure that you're doing that. And again, intonation can be a helpful tool here in your response as well. All right, so let's look at type B. Now, type B changes a little bit. It's still personal in a sense because you're giving your personal opinion, but now you need to be a little bit more objective, a little bit more, thinking about others as well in a bigger way. But also, it still involves you and it's your opinion. So you can bring in your personal experience and your background as well, but that's not the focus. All right, so here's the question here. Obviously, notice the speaking time changes now. You'll have to speak for 90 seconds, so now it's a minute and a half, a little bit longer. So maybe 3 main ideas would be more suitable for this response. Okay, so the question itself, in your opinion, what are some of the strengths of high school education in your home country? Now it's something to think about, right? And some people, maybe they didn't like their high school education very much in their home country, and it can be more challenging for them to answer some of the strengths. That doesn't mean you cannot talk about, some of the negatives. Just remember that's not the focus. You can introduce some of that, but the focus is on the strengths. And so you want to make sure you have at least 2 or 3 good main points on that to say. Okay. So use your prep time to understand the question and brainstorm ideas, okay? And use basic notes, as we mentioned. Again, how you structure your notes is up to you. I do recommend that you do take notes. In the test center, you get paper, you'll get a pen, so definitely take notes as much as you can without being too distracted, and put your ideas into a logical order. So in this case, you want an opening statement. You want to specify where you went to high school, the country, maybe even what kind of context it was. Maybe it was an international school. Maybe it was a state-funded school. Oh, Miriam has to leave. Okay, take care. I hope to see you in another webinar soon. Okay, if anyone does have to leave at any point during the session, we totally understand. But I would mention, if you want to review this, we now provide the recording in your follow-up email, apparently. So check your follow-up email, and you may have to see, or you will see a link to this recording as well that you'll be able to review later. Okay. Alrighty. So this is just a basic outline that you could follow. Opening statement, then 3 strengths with support, and a concluding sentence. It looks very much like, your 5-paragraph essay kind of format, but it's really just a way of kind of bringing everything together in a nice way for the listener to be able to understand all of that. Okay. All right. Oh, and okay, thank you, Megan. Has let me know that the recording as well as the link are included in the email. So you'll actually get the recording, I guess. That's good. The link is there as well in case you're not able to play the recording in the email. But definitely, one way or the other, you should be able to review this recording later on if you have to leave. Okay, so building your response. Now, one thing we find time and time again is that people come up with ideas, but they're not able to really develop them, and they're not really structuring their response, because when we're speaking, it's very hard to organize everything into a coherent piece, right? So this is something you need to work on in speaking. I think in test preparation, you can work on this, and then it becomes a little bit more natural as you're speaking to be able to structure in this way. So here's a transcript, just a part of one idea here in the box. Also, they're responding to this question here, the strengths of high school education in their home country. And they wrote, or they spoke, also we learned responsibility because students work together to clean the school every day, and that is hard work. So it's okay. This was one of their additional reasons. Maybe, in their high school, they had to do tasks and they learned responsibility, like maybe cleaning the classroom or cleaning the school, who knows. But they didn't really follow up really well here. So let's work on improving it a little bit. So this is an improved response. It just shows you how you can develop a response a little bit better, okay? And by just adding these components here. For example, transitions. This person didn't use a transition that helped the listener understand this is a new main idea, right? Maybe this was a follow-up to another idea or something. Using also is not as beneficial as being a little bit more explicit, like the second benefit of high school is learning responsibility. And then making it clear that there's an example. So for example, these are basic transitions, but they really help. Also include more relevant and interesting details in purple here. So why? It's hard work is not really that persuasive or detailed, but students take turns cleaning each day, much better, by cleaning up after themselves and each other, and then further developing that idea. Take responsibility for your own actions. Also in blue here, just showing how you can improve your vocabulary use. The point is driven home is a good expression, and it's nice to use expressions when you have them, but don't worry about it too much. But if you have a nice expression, and it's good to be working on expressions, on phrasal verbs, on idioms, different expressions, but make sure they're academic when you're doing the CAEL. But if you have one to use, that's going to help in your response. But try to use good vocabulary. Also notice that the colon here, although the person is speaking, it does present a nice kind of complex sentence here. They're connecting the ideas in a way that grammatically it works, and it works in speaking as well. Okay, by saying the point is driven home, and then a little pause, take responsibility for your own actions. It's adding some complexity there in terms of sentence structure. So just wanted to give you a little taste of how you could improve an idea that's not really well developed. And that's something you want to work on in your own responses as well. Okay. Good. Palax asked, can we use idioms in speaking? Yes, you can. But you want to be careful when you're doing, academic responses. The first one is not as academic, and that's where your opportunity to use idioms could be more appropriate. You just need to be a little careful with them. Some are very informal. So this is more a question of formality, and some idioms are very informal. and some are even a little bit more academic and can be used. So just be careful with them, okay? Let's do some practice. So we're gonna actually do a timed practice, okay? So you'll get preparation time and speaking time as you would on the actual test. So we're gonna simulate that. And it's a different question. Oh, actually, no, it's the same question. So you've already had some preparation in terms of thinking about this question, but now you'll be able to actually practice it, okay? Try to use your phone or maybe your computer to record your response as well, because we do recommend that you listen to it at least a couple of times, and maybe even transcribe it and really look at the language that you're using. And the only way you can really do this is to time yourself, do an actual simulated test, and record it. That's your best, guess, or your best example of what you're actually able to do on the test. Although, the question does influence this as well. All right, let's get started. This is, when I flip the screen, your preparation time is going to begin, okay? So let's move forward. Okay, your preparation time begins now. Okay, your preparation time is complete. Start speaking now. Okay, your recording time is complete. Hopefully you were able to get through the entire 90 seconds there and come up with 3 main ideas and be able to develop each one of them. I'm curious how you feel about your response, so if you want to make a comment in the questions box, feel free. Maybe tell me some of the ideas you came up with, or maybe you were happy with your response or not so happy with it. Certainly, any reaction that you have, I'm always interested to know how you feel about it. But let's move forward here. I just want to show you the checklist as well, just to give you an idea of how you might look at your response. Look for, areas of improvement. We're always looking for, how do I rate this? I want to know what my score is. But what's really more important is for you to start picking apart your response and thinking like a rater. afterwards. What was good about my response? Maybe what are some things I could improve on, and how can I go about doing that? And I think that process will help you a lot. Thank you, Madab. It said he came up with 3 ideas but ran out of time on the 3rd one. Interesting. So there could be a number of reasons for that. Possibly, it could be rate of speech, how you're able to, how fast you're able to speak. It could be hesitations and pauses, or who knows? Could be some other things as well. But 3 ideas usually you're able to get through in 90 seconds. So there could be some reasons why that's possible. But what's really good, Madab, is that you're able to come up with 3 ideas. I think if you run out of time on the 3rd one, it's not going to hurt your response that much. So don't worry about that too much. But were you able to speak for the entire time as well? You state that you could only talk about the last one. You can only talk a little about the last one. I see. Okay, good. So you ran out of time. And we have another comment here. Iman says, there is not enough time. I didn't feel like I have enough time. And that's for speaking or for preparation? And that's what Megan's asking you about as well. I think preparation time's always going to feel, not enough. It's never going to feel like enough. But what I can say is that as you prepare, as you get better at taking notes, but also thinking about different questions, preparing with different questions as much as possible, you start to get better at coming up with ideas quickly and be able to use notes effectively. I know it doesn't feel like a lot of time, but it starts to feel better once you develop those skills. At least that's what I found. But of course, it never really feels like enough. That's for sure. But everybody suffers with that. Everyone gets the same amount of time. So in that way, it's fair, I guess. We'd all like to see more time, I think, to really think about things so we're more comfortable. But the test designers don't feel that way, right? Good. I'm just going to read a few more comments here. Manny says, some of the ideas, we should clean our hallways together. We used to pray together. Good. And group projects, and you had a closing comment. So you got everything in there. And hopefully you're able to develop each one of those a little bit. Why cleaning the hallways together was a good thing. Why praying together was a good thing. And the benefits of group projects. But those are 3 good ideas that if they're developed will do well. So don't worry. Well done. Brajinder says 3 strengths, but still didn't speak for the entire time. There was 10 seconds remaining. Yes, so sometimes it's just hard to come up with more, right? But that'll get better, I think, as you develop different responses for different questions. I find the more that you practice, these ideas start to carry over into other ones. And there's only so many questions we can ask in our life, right? About our life, or about opinions about, something related to universities or academics or studies. There's probably, if you studied 100 different questions, I think that would be enough, and you'd be able to come up with enough ideas for just about any question that you got. But that takes time, right? So not all of us have that much time. But the more practice you can do, it'll get better. All right, let's listen to a sample response. This is the same question that you just listened to, and this is the same test taker, I believe. Yes. All right, so this is the Band 70 test taker that we listened to before, and she also did well on this response, I think. But let's listen.
I grew up in the Philippines and went to a very strict Chinese school before moving here to Canada. So there are definitely some stark differences between the 2 educational systems that I noticed. One of the advantages of going to school in the Philippines is the discipline that was instilled in me since I was a child. For example, we had homework practically every day, and if the homework wasn't finished or handed in, we were simply given a 0. No extensions, no makeups, no extra credit, just a 0. And that really shaped my study habits and still stay with me today. To this day, I don't procrastinate. I make sure to hand in my work on time. I make sure to also plan in advance and manage my time wisely so that I'm able to do all the work that I have to do at a reasonable amount of time without getting too stressed. Another advantage is the high standards of achievement that were set by schools in the Philippines. Most of the stuff that I learned when I moved here and went to high school in Canada, I already learned when I was in elementary school. So there was definitely a higher standard of achievement.
Okay, so hopefully you were able to hear that well. That one seemed a little bit lower than the other one, but hopefully it's clear. And certainly the transcript is helpful. So this person, I think, did a better job even on maybe type B than they did on type A. Seemed to really have not a lot of hesitations there, and certainly some really good examples to back up the main ideas as well. So yeah, I agree. Manny thinks maybe this is a band 80 response. It's a band 70 test taker, and later you'll see in the third response, this test taker suffers a little bit in the third response. But in the first two, this test taker did really well. And I think these two responses really helped to bring the score up, okay?
I grew up in the
So let's just look again at the transitions this test taker is using. Not that impressive, but at least I like that they used a for example at least once. So that's good. And also one of the advantages and another advantages helps the listener to at least separate those main ideas, right? I think that's important. Again, work on your transitions. Note where you're using them or maybe where you're not using them that would be helpful if you did use them in your speaking. Okay. And the only way you know that is by listening to your response, maybe typing or, writing out the transcript would be very helpful as well, because then you can really see the language that you're using. In blue here are some of the language choices. They're really good. Some of the language is great, like stark differences. Instilled in me is great. Shaped my study habits. Procrastinate, which is a nice academic word as well. Plan in advance, and high standards of achievement. So here we can see language again is being used very well, and you want to continue to improve your language use. Try to slowly improve that. It should be natural though. You don't want to start putting in really complex vocabulary mixed in with basic vocabulary. It doesn't, suit so well. So you want to slowly build up your academic language in a natural way as much as you can. Again, there's always some in speaking, at least especially, you'll see some maybe awkward language, or in this case, it's just imprecise. Most of the stuff is very informal. We want to stay away from that word in more of an academic response. And she repeats higher standard of achievement, but that's not a big deal here. Unfortunately, there's no closing here again, but overall pretty good. I like that they have a very good introduction here. It's very clear, well presented. So the listener really understands, right? And two main ideas, one of the advantages and another advantage. So discipline and high standards of achievement. Not a lot of time to develop the second idea, maybe because they developed too much of the first idea. Okay, so that's something you want to work on, balance this a little bit better. But again, I don't think a speaking response will ever be perfect. There'll always be, something because it's speaking. And as others have said, they don't feel super confident about their speaking, and they worry about their scores in speaking because it's one of the most stressful things. Writing is also a challenge, but at least we have a little bit more time to organize ourselves. But it's still very stressful. But speaking really, maxes out our ability to think quickly and to be able to respond on the spot like this. It's not easy. So think of at least 3 ideas to support your opinion. You can do well with 2 ideas if you develop both of them very well. You can still do well. But 3 ideas is probably safer for a 90-second response. Open with a general statement or a firm statement of opinion. Always start by directly addressing the question. Make sure you understand the question, and that lets the rater know that you fully understand the question and you have organized your response as well. Introduce each idea clearly, preferably with transitions that are accurate. Try to provide unbiased information. So you don't want to just talk about, it's okay to talk about a personal story. That's okay. But you don't want to go into a lot of detail because you don't have a lot of time, and that's not really the point of the response. But a short little personalization is okay. But you don't want to base your entire response on just your own opinion, on your own experience. You want to show that you're a bit objective here, okay? That, maybe what was true for you in your experience in high school or whatever is not necessarily the same for everybody, and you want to be a little bit more objective. And that's where, in academics, we try to be a little bit more academic, and that includes being objective and thinking about multiple perspectives, different sides, at least the opposite side as well, to your own. Also, leave time, if you can, for a short wrap-up statement. She wasn't able to do that, but it didn't influence her too much, but it's certainly something that you could work on. All right, let's move on to speaking on a visual. And this does create some challenges for some test takers who are not used to maybe looking at visual information, graphs and charts and things, and being able to speak intelligently about them can be a challenge. So this is something you really want to work on in test preparation. Make sure you can look at a graph and be able to understand roughly what it means and be able to speak about it fairly quickly. You do get a minute preparation time, but you have to speak for 2 minutes about this graph. Okay, and that's important to realize because there's only so much you can say about the graph, and you can't just, describe detail after detail after detail. You need to interpret it, and you need to speak about it intelligently. And so this can be challenging. And so look at the instructions down here on the left and the bottom. Describe and explain the information you see depicted in the graph. So that's your first task, is describe it. But does that mean describe every little detail? No. You need to describe and explain. And that means the important things, okay? So a summary. Sorry, the second part there was what conclusions can you draw? And that's where you're able to really fill out the time. So just looking at the chart itself, you get a summary. This is helpful because it tells you some information about what the chart is about. So it's about non-resident travelers to Canada. So I need to know that. Describe the elements in the chart and explain, and the conclusions. So make sure you note all of these things. You want to provide a summary statement at the beginning, an overview sentence. So you want to summarize what this chart is about. And you don't want to repeat too much. You could say this chart shows non-resident travelers to Canada, but that's not impressive. So you want to try to change it a little bit, make it a little bit longer, and make sure you're providing a good overview of what this is about. List some of the key elements that are in the chart. For example, there's 3 modes of transportation here: land, air, and sea. So I may want to mention that in my overview as well. But also I might mention, the time frame. I may mention, how many people we're talking about, right? And then also an explanation. So you'll need to explain what this means, and that means interpretation. And that's not just describing, you're also explaining. And that it's a little bit more involved. Okay, and that's where we talk about trends maybe, or we talk about changes over time. And then finally, conclusions and predictions. And I think this is one of the more challenging part. Okay, so would you like to practice again? I think so. You're going to look at this chart, the same chart, and you're going to try to practice your response. Okay, I'm going to give you the preparation time and the recording time that you would get on the actual test as well. Okay. All right, let's get started. Your preparation time begins now. Okay, your preparation time is complete. Start speaking now. Okay, your speaking time is complete. Sorry if I gave you a few seconds extra there. Hopefully you're able to get through 2 minutes. I find this one challenging to get through 2 minutes sometimes. There are a lot of things to talk about in the chart, but you don't need to talk about everything. It would be a little bit strange to explain every little thing that you see. For example, going in detail along, the land, how many non-residents travelers to Canada came by land. And then I mentioned from 2013 to 2014, it didn't move much. And then 2014 to 2015, it didn't move much. And it was a little bit of an increase. I wouldn't go into detail like that. It's not really what is required in academics. More importantly, you want to think, what can I say generally about this? But enough information that gets me through at least a minute or more than a minute in terms of describing, explaining, and then be able to draw conclusions as well as you are able to do. So I want to just look here. Here's the checklist. Remember, because you're speaking on a visual, there's an extra component here, which is added to this checklist. That might be helpful later when you're trying to assess your responses. Okay, so make sure you're using this checklist. It's the first 4 components up top here are the same for all the speaking responses. You'll just see an additional component down here for some of them. But let's look at this response and see, okay, what can I do? How can I approach this task in a way that gets me through the 2 minutes in an organized way where I'm not focused on details too much, but just enough. So I might focus on that, well, there are 3 ways, obviously, that people are traveling. There's a time period involved here. There's an overall trend. Here we can see an overall trend of increase, especially, obviously for air, but also for sea as well. We see an increase there. Sorry, for land, but not for sea very much, but certainly an overall trend of increase. But we may talk about the details, the largest increase, maybe a similarity, or even a difference. So how might this look in terms of more detail? So the 3 ways, the time period where I'm talking about a 3-year time period, or maybe you could argue it's a 4-year time period. It's hard to know. I think we would call this a 4-year time period. An overall trend is that all three do increase, although they do increase not in the same amounts, right? So the largest increase is by plane. That's clear. And then both plane and overland dipped slightly in 2014. So we can notice in the chart from 2013 to 2014, we see a dip. And that's an interesting thing to be focused on because that might help you to make a conclusion as well. Obviously, there's something happened to cause that, but then we see increases after that. And so that's an interesting thing to focus on. And then, of course, difference, the boat or ship by land is fairly steady as compared to plane and by land. So that's interesting as well. Why does the sea numbers, the number of non-resident travelers arriving by sea, not really change that much? So that's something to think about as well. But those details allow you then to draw conclusions. So here, a very simple conclusion is more people are visiting Canada, obviously, in 2016 as compared to 2013. But there are other things we can conclude, or at least maybe make a prediction about, or maybe a guess, an educated guess as to why. Okay, so maybe there are some predictions that we could talk about. These are just areas where we might start to make some conclusions. Why is the biggest increase by plane, for example? Maybe prices were better. Maybe there was much more competition, so people were able to get tickets at a much better price. Who knows? But you're able to make those guesses, those predictions, in order to kind of interpret what's going on. Madab says liberal immigration policies. I like that one. Maybe that's a good reason why there's an overall increase. I think that might be a good reason. Also, Barjinder says maybe planes are less time consuming, which is why it's more popular. Absolutely. I certainly prefer to take a plane, definitely. So that could be one. And they don't have to be amazing predictions or conclusions. Just, try to come up with some things to say about why these numbers could be the way they are. And the more you're able to say about that, great. You can get through the 2-minute response. Sometimes you get stuck and you're kind of thinking about it, why this could be, but just try to come up with something as to why the numbers could be as they are. But if you just simply say, your conclusions are obviously more people prefer to come by plane, that's enough of a conclusion as well. Okay, so let's just get through these and we'll move forward. I'm sure you'd like to listen to a sample response. Madab's asked, can you only guess? We may be wrong. Yes, you can be wrong. It's okay. There is no right or wrong here. But you want to be realistic. You don't want to make crazy kind of predictions, right? You want to be realistic in your predictions or your conclusions or your guesses. So educated guesses about as to why these numbers could appear as they are. But yeah, I hope that helps. Let's listen to a sample response. I'm going to play it with the, so this is the same test taker, the Band 70 test taker. And here you might see where this person struggled a little bit and probably why the first two responses were very helpful to them, but not necessarily this one as much. Okay, but let's listen.
Based on the graph, there are more and more travelers coming into Canada within the last 3 years. And most of them seem to be taking the plane to come here. Interestingly, there's also a drop in travelers in the middle of 2014, but it seems to have picked up after that. It'd be interesting to know why there was a drop. In land transportation, it's relatively stable. There is about close to 1 million and it's also been increasing recently. Air travel is by far the most popular one, and sea has just remained at practically zero, less than 500,000.
Okay, so I'm not going to play the rest of it. Or sorry, there is nothing left. This person was only able to speak for 48 seconds, not even a minute. And so I'm not sure why this test taker was not able to continue. Maybe they thought there's nothing else to say, but their score would have been significantly impacted. So Manpreet, you're asking what her score is. I can't tell you the score of this individual response, unfortunately, only that she's a band 70 test taker overall. And so this one is definitely not at a 70 level, in my opinion. So it would bring the score down, the overall score. All I know is the overall score for this test taker, which was band 70. So, but the test taker is able to deal with some things here. They certainly provide a bit of an overview, but not much, right? They kind of get right into talking about more travelers, coming in within the last 3 years. So they're getting right into the details. The language use is okay. They're using some appropriate language here. Okay. So I just wanted to show you some of that language. Drop. This is what you want to get used to as well, is getting used to language that's used to describe trends, especially in graphs. And there's lots of information available online about that. And you want to incorporate that into your vocabulary a little bit. Picked up, stable, increasing recently, remained at. There's all kinds of language you can use to describe this. Trends, basically. Yeah, so Madab, I only know her overall score. Unfortunately, the way the scoring is done, we don't score individual responses. It's a complex process, which I don't fully understand myself, but unfortunately, I'm not able to tell you what the score is in terms of a band level for this. Okay, but overall, she was a band 70. Unfortunately, she wasn't really able to come up with many conclusions. She didn't offer much in terms of the conclusions. And this is where the opportunity to increase the time was, but she was not able to come up with much. She said it would be interesting to know why. But let's look at a better response, a more full response that really looks at all of the details a little bit more and provides some good predictions as well. So I'll show you the transcript as we listen, okay?
The chart before us depicts the number of non-resident travelers to Canada between the years of 2013 to 2016 by traveling by land, sea, and air. The number of non-resident travelers to Canada is measured and starts from 0, goes to 500,000, and increases in increments of 500,000 up to 5 million. We can see that air travel is the most popular method, then land, then sea. However, between the years of 2013 and 2014, the number of non-resident travelers to Canada who came by air and land were on the decline. What we can conclude from this is that between those years, travel to Canada was a little less popular, and so did not draw as many tourists or other non-resident travelers. After that, however, travel by land and air increases from the years 2014 to 2016. This we can conclude means that travel to Canada by any means was on the increase, more popular and more desired, with even a greater increase between 2014 and 2015 than there is between 2015 and 2016 by air. Sea travel is generally, on the whole, very steady and not increasing by much any year on this graph. And so what we can conclude is that people prefer to go by land or by air if they are traveling to Canada.
Okay, so this was a band 80. Again, this is for all the speaking responses. They were able to get a band 80. I think this is a very good response for this task. They came up with some conclusions. They're basic conclusions. They're, but they are conclusions, and that's good, and that's what you want to try to do. It's very organized. It's well organized. Kind of going basically by each mode of transportation, one by one. I don't really think it's necessary to explain the axis, the number, but I mean, there's no perfect response, and this is challenging as well. So you may focus on things sometimes that aren't as important, but certainly overall, this person did quite well. And so when we look at some of the language here, again, transitions they're really pretty good here. These phrases, obviously, however, but what we can conclude from this, she uses a few times, but it's very useful for the listener to be able to know that, oh, okay, this is a conclusion. Also, yeah, I think that's it for the transitions, but it helped to organize the response. It was easy to follow along. Language in terms of describing trends and graphs and things, great. Increases in increments of, on the decline, did not draw as many tourists, is good, by any means, and very steady. So this language was pretty good. I think using increase maybe too many times, but that's common because, it's a very common word for describing these things. Also, that this test taker started with a very good overview. Again, they don't necessarily need to go into that detail in terms of the numbers, but it's a very good overview, and I get a good sense of what the graph is about. And then there's a closing remark as well, which is also important to try to do, not to just end on one of your main ideas. So use your preparation time to note key information in the diagram. And this could be things such as topic and factors like time, cost, distance. This can be helpful in getting you started. Try to have a way of organizing it that helps you. Instead of randomly moving around the graph, if you can have some sort of organization to how you're describing it, that would always help the listener as well. Focus on what you've learned from the diagram. Remember, it's not just describing, you're explaining and even concluding or predicting even. So you want to focus on what you're learning from the diagram while note-taking. Start with a summary of important aspects of the diagram. Describe connections, explain trends, even make comparisons. I think that's a very good strategy, is to make comparisons to help you get through the full 2 minutes. Include your own thoughts about what the diagram tells you. So this is where you can predict a little bit based on your own opinion. Again, you want to make them realistic, but certainly it helps to fill out the time as well. Try to use the specialized vocabulary, words like stabilize, fluctuation, marginal. Work on that and in this task, because it will help you to describe accurately, and end with your conclusions or predictions, right? So must-dos, determine exactly what you need to do. Be able to confidently state your opinion. This applies to all the independent speaking tasks, okay? But they'll be available later if you want to take a screenshot of, as well. Obviously, we want to work on our speaking ability, and the best way to do that is to practice, use different questions, try to simulate real time, test time, but also practice without time. Sometimes the stress of time can not really help you, right? Okay, so important to do both kinds of test preparation with timed practice and non-timed practice, I recommend. All right, some people have to leave. Bye-bye, Allah. But remember, you can review this later by linking to the video through your email that will come about an hour afterwards. All right, we have still some integrated speaking to talk about. We're not going to be able to practice this because it's a little bit difficult, because remember, integrated speaking happens after you actually listen to a lecture or you read a passage, right? So we're not really able to simulate that here today because we just wouldn't have enough time to go through a whole reading passage or a whole lecture. But I wanted to give you a sense of what happens in integrated speaking as well. You need to use the sources. You have about a minute prep time and 2 minutes speaking time. Okay, and you're scored on content, language, and using the sources. Now, I mentioned before, it's not just a summary. You're not expected to just summarize what you read or what you listened to. You need to incorporate that into your own response, which might include your own opinion. But certainly it wouldn't just be a summary, okay? Again, the checklist will be a little bit different. Here, it's speaking on the long reading is added, okay, because there are basically sources now that you need to integrate into your speaking response. Also remember that, you do the short reading and then you do the long reading on the same topic and you're answering questions. You don't know what the speaking question is while you're doing your reading tasks. So it's important to keep that in mind. And I keep reminding people of that, is that you'll need to answer a speaking question, but you don't know what that speaking question is going to be. But you need to keep that in mind. And that means not just focusing on multiple choice questions without thinking about the overall reading, the long reading, right? Really trying to understand it and keep that in your mind because you're going to have to speak about it. So any reactions you have to the reading or any thoughts you might have, try to keep that all in your mind and maybe even take notes at the end of the reading task to help you. Anything you can write down to help you is going to help you in the speaking. All right, so let's say this was your speaking question that you would get after your short reading and long reading, and then you're expected to focus on the long reading and speak about it. And this would be your question here. Your preparation time is, again, 60 seconds and 2 minutes of speaking time. It's, again, not going to feel like a lot. The good thing is that you do get access to the reading passage, and you may refer to it by clicking that tab. If you click reading passage, you'll be able to see it, okay? Use that source information, but do not copy directly because it's tempting. You can see the reading passage and you might want to just read it out. It's not recommended to do that, to try to paraphrase. Use your own words at all times as much as you can, except for specialized terminology. That you can't change. You obviously will repeat that. It's okay. But we're talking about phrases of 3 to 4, 5 words, or a whole sentence. You really don't want to be repeating that in your speaking response. Okay, and you want to also look at how you're being evaluated for this. Okay, remember there are 2 parts to this question. Why do engineering disasters happen, and what are the causes of errors? Okay, you will see the reading passage, which will help you, but again, you only have 60 seconds of preparation time. So it's not enough time to review the reading deeply, to go into any detail. But it might be helpful in terms of where certain information is that could help you right now in answering. And that would be something you do in your note taking. Okay. When you're doing the listening, you will have access to the lecture notes, which are not as much, but again, you only have 60 seconds of preparation time. So maybe this is a little bit better. It gives you a summary, okay, of what was said in the lecture with a little bit of the details for the main points that were made. This can be very helpful, but again, you don't want to repeat these phrases too much. Of course, you're going to repeat some of the specialized language, like maybe even one size fits all you have to repeat, sophisticated models maybe, but you want to try to change language as much as you can and use your own words, okay? All right, so key questions. What do you need to talk about and how do you organize your ideas? So what do you need to talk about? Again, we know 2 parts to the question, right? So I do recommend in note taking, This is, for example, in the reading, why disasters happen and the causes. So I think this is an effective way of taking notes by looking at the parts of the question. Remember, there are two parts, and using that as a way of organizing your notes. I think this can be very effective. So one quick way of doing this is looking for some of the ideas that you can speak about. So why do disasters happen? Maybe I focus in on violation of codes of practice, but I don't want to repeat that phrase, so I change it to not following industry rules. Instead of miscommunication, I might write poor communication. Even changing it just this much can help. Extreme weather conditions, I might just say bad weather while building. I might want to improve the academic language there a little bit, maybe inclement weather, something like that. Extreme weather, try to find a synonym for extreme is helpful. Again, it's hard to do all of this, but we try to do our best and make it as academic as we can. Weak ethics instead of questionable engineering ethics. Also, you want to have an opening statement. And you know, you don't have a lot of time to write this out, but certainly a couple of keywords to help you open. At least think about it. How might you open your response? And so this is borrowed a little bit from the reading itself. Okay, so just by reading this beginning, you could maybe come up with an idea like this. Like everyone else, engineers aren't perfect, but their mistakes tend to be highly visible and attract lots of attention. So it's good to have an opening statement like this. So if you want to take a screenshot of that, Eamon, quickly, go ahead. I think that's the one you need. Okay, so also a closing statement, and this is, you really can't think about this deeply. You just don't have enough time. What I recommend is that you have a few phrases that you're constantly using, okay, that you're just very comfortable with. I like the second one here, to return to my main point, and that's when you have a main point that you've made, right? Certainly a nice way of concluding, but if you don't have one, just say in closing or something like that is fine. All right, so determine exactly what you have to talk about. Again, anything you can remember from the reading. You have a little bit of time to read, but not a lot of preparation time. But certainly you've gone through the reading, you've answered a bunch of questions about it, and hopefully you've built up some knowledge about that topic by doing that. And then whatever you remember, and maybe a few notes that you've taken, and now that you know the question, you're able to really bring that all together quickly. And you might have time to skim the reading. Maybe there's something you kind of remember, but you need a little more clarification. You can skim the reading to find a little bit more if you have time. Try to rephrase ideas. Again, you can't write them down that way, but as you speak, you try to rephrase. Try not to copy. Think of a good opening statement and organize your notes. All right, we have time to listen for one sample response, but again, we haven't done the reading, so it's very hard for you to get a sense of how well they're doing in terms of incorporating the reading. But I wanted you to get a sense of what a response might sound like for speaking on the long reading. Okay, so this is the question. Why do engineering disasters happen, and what are the causes of errors? So this was an actual test taker response. And this is I guess, I'll let you maybe guess what level this band, what band level this test taker is after you listen here. But have a listen.
Engineering disasters happen sometimes because of unforeseen weather conditions such as natural disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, etc. But also, according to Miroslav Matusek and George Snyder, two researchers who did a study, found that the main causes of engineering failure include carelessness, negligence, and human unpreparedness. More recently, George Sowers looked at 500 cases of engineering failures and identified that 88% of these cases were due to what he called human shortcomings, with ignorance and not using the appropriate technology being the most common factors. What causes these errors is mostly a lack of communication. For example, in the walkway collapse in the Kansas City hotel, that was a lack of communication between the designer and the engineer. Sometimes these errors are caused by using the incorrect units in the case of the Mars Climate Orbiter. And also what could cause errors such as these is not having correct supervision, as it was the case in the error of the Quebec Bridge. All of these cases are human errors, things that could have been avoided had the right precautions been used. These would apply to George Sower's 33% ignorance. And also to mostly a lack of communication.
Okay, I think there was a little bit extra time left at the end. Manpreet thinks this is a band 80 test taker. Any other guesses? I think it's hard to really judge how well this person is incorporating the sources, but you get a sense. I can tell you that they haven't copied too much. There's a few phrases that might have been copied a bit too much, but not a lot of that. And they organized it quite well. She did hesitate. You're right, Leah, that she hesitated. Maybe you think that brings her down to a 70, maybe even a 60 possibly. Madab thinks maybe a 70. Ayman thinks 80. This was a band 80 test taker. So again, we don't know the actual band level for this specific response, but we can tell that this person speaks well. They're able to provide details and follow up on some of the, this is a hard task, right? It's not an easy task to do. And so we have to keep that in mind, and raters know this, obviously, is when they listen to all these responses, they get a sense of, you know, what constitutes a much better response for the difficulty level. And this is a difficult response. To be able to listen to something, answer multiple choice questions, challenging. So yeah, Jorgen thinks maybe a lot of repetition here. There is some repetition, and I definitely agree with you there. So maybe this person did extremely well in their first three questions, and this one maybe, you know, you could argue it's a 70. But again, what's important is to really focus in on what's good about it, on your own response, and how you can improve that response. We're just trying to improve all the time, right? And repetition is something that could be improved here, I think. All right, so the checklist, again, you want to be using that. Okay, but here we see some of the transitions being used. Pretty good, but they can be improved. Okay, and again, we see this as, or I see this as one of the easiest things to be working on to improve. Also, it helps you structure your response better. And so that you're kind of doing two things with one strategy here by creating better transitions, making sure you're using them appropriately at the right time can really help your response. Now, there is good language here in blue. Unforeseen weather, most common factors, precautions. We can see some good language use here that's not from the reading, which is great. But some of it is from the reading, but not too bad in terms of, because they didn't really copy 3 to 5 words or a full sentence in the same order. So that's a little less of a problem, but still you want to try to avoid that. Also, a very good opening and closing. This is, I think, one of the strengths of this response, is that the opening and the closing is very clear, okay, and they address the question directly, which is important, okay. All right, I think maybe they didn't address all parts of the question very well. The second part of the question was, how do they help us understand, or sorry, let's go back to that. Why do engineering disasters and what are the causes of errors? I think they do a very good job on the second one, and the first one is answered implicitly by addressing the second one. So not too bad in task fulfillment, I think, as well. All right, so we don't have too much time left. There is speaking on the long listening as well, and that's the last speaking task you'll need to do. It's a lot more challenging in some ways because remember, you're listening, you're not reading, and you are answering questions as you listen. So you're kind of focused on different things while you're listening. And so, at least for me, it's very challenging to then think about some of the details that I can use from that listening. I have to really actively listen and maybe even take a few notes along the way. You do get a little bit of review time after you're listening. When the listening is complete, you get some review time to go over your questions. But I think that time can be used efficiently for taking a few notes and really reflecting on what the entire listening meant to you to help you get some, understanding of that listening and where to add details that hopefully you can remember. But you do get the lecture notes, which is important. This will help, jog your memory and help you draw on things that you remember or maybe some notes that you took to help organize your response. So speaking in the long listening, again, you have to determine exactly what you have to talk about. Focus on the question. Use the notes to help you remember the main points. Then identify information from that lecture. Not all of the information in the lecture can be used, but some of it will be very important, and hopefully that's stuck with you. That's going to be important, and the notes can help you as well. Write down other points you remember that relate to the question. That might be from the listening, and you can also draw on your own experience as well, or your own logic to kind of add a little bit as you go. There's nothing wrong with that. Organize your notes and think of ways to rephrase key ideas so that you're not repeating too much, right? If you can, think of a good opening statement. I think it's best to, you can't write it out because you won't have that time, but have a strategy for how you're going to open. And that could be, rephrasing something that you're seeing in the reading or rephrasing something that you remember from the listening to kind of get an opening that works for you. All right, so again, what do you need to talk about? Two different parts to the question, how we organize your notes, and I always tend to use the parts of the question to help me take notes. So this is just an example of how I might take notes. I don't think I could take these many notes in the time that I have. I would be writing these much shorter, probably with very short keywords to help me, bullet points. I just wanted to show you the full, it's a little easier for you to understand here. But these are the kind of notes that would help you get through your speaking response. Okay, again, an opening statement, introduce the topic. Again, borrow on the question itself, but don't just restate the question unless that's all you're able to do. If that's all you can think of, just restate the question is okay. But you don't want to do that if you can think of another way of opening, right? But draw on that, it's okay. List your main points and get the listener interested in what you're going to say. So here's an example of what you could do in an opening statement. So the question is, what are economic models and how do they help us understand the economy? Well, some people find economics boring, but the fact is that the more we know about economics, the more likely we are to be financially successful. One way to understand this topic is through economic models. I'm going to explain what they are, and then I'll demonstrate how we can use economic models to gain insights into how the economy works. That's a fantastic introduction, very difficult to come up with on the spot, but it does give you an idea of what you might need to do. Remember, the hook, the opening there, really is based on my background information or my own thinking. It's not something I necessarily took directly from the reading or the listening, but maybe it is. It's okay. Whatever you need to draw on that helps you to get that listener interested and informed about what you're going to be talking about. That helps to organize your response as well. So that's what you want to aim for. And again, non-timed practice, I think, is helpful to develop this. Okay. Now, we don't have time to listen to this sample, but I did want to show you a transcript of someone. This is, again, the same Band 80 test taker who is responding to the long listening. And so you might want to take a screenshot of that or review it later in the video that you'll get in your email, okay? Just to look at some of the language use here as well, okay? But we're going to skip through that. And again, remember the checklist is a little bit different at the end because it's a different task, all right? And here's just some of the language that I've highlighted, transitions, very good language use here. I thought some of it's a little bit borrowed, but most of it is their own language, which is great. And so that's what you want to be able to do. Good. And again, a good opening and a good closing. Closing maybe not the best, but at least they made a good effort there as well. So integrated speaking tasks, identify all parts of the question. I might want to use that to take notes as well, to structure your notes. I find that to be a very helpful strategy. Find, remember relevant information, so important in this task. Use that information to support your opinion and make organized notes as best you can. If you have a clear introductory sentence, an opening, that's really helpful. Try to avoid rambling and then with a closing statement. So again, these strategies will be available later for you, okay? And I'm gonna skip this one, but it'll be available for you later as well. It's individual strategies for speaking tasks, integrated speaking tasks for preparation time and while you're actually speaking. So the goal here is to work towards an organized, complete response, right? All right, so before the test, if you want to work on improving your score, improve your academic English, develop your sentence structure. Again, speaking, recording, and transcribing and analyzing your language will help you to slowly develop this. Work with audiobooks and try to reduce any pronunciation issues you're having and do daily timed practice sessions as well. Also, non-timed practice is very helpful here, right? While you're speaking, as best you can, speak with confidence and authority. Use intonation, stress, brief pauses can all be helpful to the listener. Try not to hesitate too long. If you get stuck, better to drop something and just move on to the next idea than to wait for the idea to come into your mind. It's just better to move on. If it's not going to come in a few seconds, it's better to just drop it. Include transitions, as I've mentioned many times today. Complete sentences as much as possible, vary them to show your control of grammar, right? All right, so we are done. Those are the 5 speaking responses that you're preparing for. And in order to better prepare, you may want to look into some of our study materials here. So we do have quite a bit on offer. In terms of free services or products here, the sample test is something you definitely need to look into if you haven't. It's available on our website. But we have all these other tools or services as well in products. So I want to go over them a little bit. I'll just mention that we do currently have 5 practice tests available for purchase. If you were to purchase all 5, you do get a discount there, which is nice, but depends on how much time you have, right? But let's look at a few of the things. This is free. It is the overview. It does have some test strategies and study tips as well. It's a free download. I do recommend downloading it just to have a reference for the structure of the test and some tips. We have 5 practice tests as mentioned, okay? And we have a great program for those of you who might have a little bit more time to prepare. The CAEL Accelerate program is awesome. It's really, I think, one of our best products. So do look into it. There are many instructional videos. There's a complete practice test included here. It's $30, I think, which is great. It's only $5 more than a practice test. You get a practice test, a different practice test in the CAEL Accelerate, and you get a whole bunch more. So really look into that. And you do it at your own pace. You can do it again and again and again. Okay, so definitely look into that one. This one is a newer one. It's called CAEL Practice Test Plus. The only difference between this one and Accelerate, well, there are some other differences, but this does not include instructional videos. So if you do like instructional videos, you may want to go with CAEL Accelerate. But if you like, more text-based reading and a lot of downloadables that you can work on in terms of strategies and vocabulary building, grammar, all kinds of, additional exercises and activities to help you prepare. And it's built around another practice test. So really there are at least seven practice tests for you to access here. We also have the CAEL Skills Workbook. This is designed to help you prepare for all components of the test. There's 40 interactive activities here. You can also get a print version. Some people do prefer to work on paper, so you can order that and have it delivered, or work online as well. We also have a vocabulary builder as well. Okay, and this provides a strategy for developing your academic vocabulary based on themes. Okay, so I do recommend this one as well for those who want to, improve their vocabulary and they're looking for strategies on how they might be able to do that. And I will also mention our webinars. This is, of course, the speaking workshop, which is 301. And then we have next week a writing workshop, which Megan will be delivering next week. And she is an expert in this area, so I do recommend attending that one if you want to work on your writing for the test. Certainly attend that one. But also then we go back every month. We do this series. We have a Get the Facts session, which is overview, but also an opportunity to ask questions. So you really want to attend that one if you have some burning questions. Then we have a four series course. It's 4 90-minute lessons, and that, as I mentioned at the beginning, goes through each part of the test one by one. And if you're able to attend all 4, that's great. It's done over 2 days right now, so it's great if you can attend 2 on one day and 2 on another. And then, of course, we have the speaking and writing again. Okay, and usually they're at the same time. It really depends. We recommend you look at our website, cael.ca, and look for the webinar schedule and sign up as early as possible to make sure that you get a spot, right? Okay. And I did mention the pretest early on, and I'll mention it again. If you haven't had a chance to look into the pretest, it's a great option. It's free, and all you need to do is find a test center that offers this. And if they do, and you're available and you can sign up, there are many cities, as you can see, that offer this. Multiple test centers in many cities will offer the pretest. You can go there and you do a simulated test in the real test center. So you get to see, the test center itself and use the same computer that you will be using, the same headset, and you'll get scores for your reading and listening. You'll also do speaking and writing, but you won't get scores for that, but you get a sense of your overall performance. The big benefit here is that you get a $50 discount on your CAEL test, and you don't need to register for the CAEL test to do the pretest. Okay, so it's a great way of checking out the test to see how you feel about it and then making a decision, and then you get the bonus as well. All right, so we made it through the entire session. I was a little bit late, and thanks for those who stuck around right to the end. I appreciate it. These are just some ways that you can get in touch with us if you have any questions. Definitely look into our website is probably your first place you want to go, into the frequently asked questions section of the website. If your answers aren't there, there's multiple options to get in touch with us. There's an online chat option as well that is available on the website on the bottom right corner, usually Monday to Friday during business hours. It's available, and you can get an immediate answer. If not, send an email, call us, You can also check out our Facebook and Twitter page as well. We also have a YouTube channel, and you can get to that by typing in CAEL test in YouTube. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. We really appreciate all your engagement today and your questions. And thank you, Megan, for helping me out with the answers. It's so helpful to have someone on board to address many of the questions. So very, very helpful. And thank you, Nadab, really appreciate it. Barjinder, Ayman as well, Ibrahim, Manpreet, we really appreciate your positive comments. We keep trying to improve the webinars for you, and also all of the products and test preparation materials that we have. And we'll continue to do so, okay? So I hope to see you at another webinar. Again, next week, it'll be Megan doing a writing workshop, so you may want to attend that one. Sign up as soon as you can. All right, in the meantime, have a great rest of the day. And for those who are doing a test this weekend, I wish you all the best. I wish you get, I hope you get all the easiest questions possible. All right, take care, and I will see you again. All right, bye-bye.